Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I'm just completed this video, and I'm wiped out because I did a lot of reading of and the AI bot Gemini, Google Gemini AI, whatever it is that I have interactions with. And I started this video with some AI guys on TED Talks talking about some of the crazy capacity of AI and some of the potential disasters, including wars started over AI, which I didn't even understand was a possibility, but now I see as a realistic thing. And so I covered that yesterday to start this video. And I'll show you that clip first. And then I asked questions about the inevitable economic collapse and population reduction. And the AI, in the AI sort of way that it tries to support what you're saying, but also represent the mainstream view, kind of finally broke down and admitted that if there isn't changes to all the things I talk about, that all these things are inevitable. Economic collapse and population reduction. Like it kind of agrees with you at first, and you'll see it as it answers, and it, eventually breaks down. Before I got to that, I did a warm-up question about Hilaria Baldwin being able to be in a place, grow up in Boston. Somehow Boston simultaneously was in Spain, and the AI basically said she's a lying piece of shit, which is kind of hilarious, and did it in a very detailed way. And so those things are part of this video. So when I get to my voiceover, I'm just going to read the AI's reaction. And so when I get to that segment of the video, I'm going to put a little bit of a clip that's going to be repeating between the various compilation clips I have about economic collapse and technological things that I have together with like robots, and I have these compilation clips I play for my audio videos where I just do a voiceover. But you'll see the exchange I have with the AI bot, but it's not meant for you to read along. I'm just going to scroll through it quickly so you can see this extensive discussion I have with it, so that you see that it's documented what I'm saying. Of course, I couldn't make this stuff up because I couldn't speak like an AI bot. But that's just so you can see it. But anyways, let's get into it here. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I want to ask, today's Tuesday, January 3rd, June 3rd. January, June 3rd. I had the idea today, and I'm going to do the video tomorrow. It'll be up on Thursday. I'm going to ask AI, how is it possible for America to pay off its debt? National debt and unfunded liabilities and the rest of it. Which the answer, if the AI was going to be honest, would be almost, would be whatever would happen to make the debt payable would be catastrophic, right? That would be hyperinflation where, whatever. I've talked about this extensively. And so that's coming up, that whole exchange I haven't had yet. And I had to go out and there was a TED Talk here as this guy Eric Schmidt and this other guy interviewing him who both worked for Google, and that's going to be significant in a moment. But they're talking about this moment here where AI computer program beat the I guess this is maybe that instance where it beat the grandmaster, the greatest person at the game Go. And it was significant because the AI created a whole new strategy and a whole new moves that had never been done before. And after hundreds of years, thousands of years of this game Go, and over 1 billion people who play it worldwide, some of the most brilliant minds, mathematical and intuitional minds, because it's a much more intuitive game. And he's going to go on to say something else that is pretty significant about the AI World War III possibility. And so then it auto-played into this as I was driving. And this is Demis Habitus, is the guy who invented the AI that beat the grandmaster of Go, and said it was a lot harder than chess because chess is more, mathematical and analytical, as Go has a lot of intuition in it. And so, he talked about that more extensively in this video and some of the other things that AI has accomplished. But there's a reason I'm recording this now, because the Eric Schmidt video, they were talking about the downside, and I want to think the date on the video. It's fairly recent. It's since that other guy, because they talk about, it's from 2 weeks ago, and it's got 1.3 million views. And it talks about what that other guy was saying, the guy who came down out and warned about AI. And one of the things I want to say is a lot of it, they keep on saying 5 years. That, we have 5 years. And there's a lot of interesting things in there, but the one thing that I want to point out here is he was talking about how that, let's say that the guy who was interviewing him was representing Google and whoever else were 6 months ahead of his team, Eric Schmidt's team, on creating, I think, what he called super consciousness in AI. And it sounds like 6 months isn't so far behind, but once that happened, once you've reached super consciousness, you would never be able to catch up. And so that would give the person that basically would change the world with this super consciousness AI bullshit, right? Such an unfair advantage in every aspect of, these whatever tech wars or whatever was going to go on, that he would have no other alternative but to try to sabotage what he said was the good guy, the guy for Google, who had created the super consciousness 6 months ahead of when he was scheduled to, right? So they would have to sabotage him. And so he went through various ways of sabotaging and finally said, if none of those ways work, we're going to have to bomb your facilities. And he said, this is not some kind of fantastical thought or some imaginative science fiction plot. It's actually what's being talked about. Because if China or America or whatever it is, some independent industry gets this super consciousness, they'll be like ruling the world or whatever it is. And everyone else will do everything in their power to stop it. And so there's potential for World War III based in that. Because it's like, the way that whoever's first with a nuclear bomb, atomic bomb type of scenario. And so, but what he said, I went back and I got, I was stopped, there's some traffic. And I went back and I re-listened to it because I wasn't sure what he said. And I was, tend to sort of get into a meditative state and, daydream or whatever, just focus on the drive, but I want to hear what he said about this to make it clear. And what he said was that sometime in the near future, and both these guys used to work at Google, and I tried to confirm it with Google Gemini, and I asked the Google Gemini, and they said, well, this isn't true. But he said there'll be a point in the near future where they'll have 1 million AI programmers instead of people programming, writing code. AI will be able to write code, and they'll have all these programmers. And once that's, they're capable of writing that much code, I mean, the only thing that's going to stop AI at this point is a lack of electricity. It was talking about the electrical needs, and that, electricity is, we don't have the structure now, and there's no real way to get it. And Trump is, of course, building those power plants, but he was talking about how that, the enough electricity to run whole giant cities and things like this for just some of these like supercomputers or whatever it is, like crazy amounts of electricity like that. I'm a little unclear about that happened at the beginning of the video, but it's crazy amounts of electricity. And how is that going to come about? Like, who's going to have the amount of power to do this? But for example, if Google or some America or China was able to create AI programmers faster than other competing entities, then it would be like game over, because they're AI programmers would just be able to do things so much more quickly and outcompete all these other things. So there's a race against time, and for some kind of, and they don't even know what it does. Like, they've been shocked by, because they create AI, and the guy who was talking about it beating Go said that first they started with Atari games. And I forget which game it was. It was like, not Pong, but one of those games. The AI found a way to move the pixel behind the screen to create, an advantage and get more points than anybody had done before. And so they're often shocked with what an AI figures out. They give it basic commands like find a way to score more points than anybody else, and the AI does it like in record time. I mean, there's nothing like it, so there's no, it's not competing against, basically other AI. And so all this stuff is happening, and they have no idea what the AI is going to do. And Eric Schmidt was talking about computers creating their own computers and their own, like almost like split personality type things, or dividing, or whatever. And how they're going to regulate something they don't even know what it's doing or how it's doing it or what it's going to do. And so all that is fucking nightmare. But the bigger problem is they're aware of the advantages that AI can create for some private enterprise, a company, or a country, and whoever reaches a certain level, I mean, they already have advantages. So there's things like that which I kind of had a sense about, but now it's much more clear to me. And the other thing was, I was watching this movie, Mountainhead, whatever it was. I talked about this earlier. That these guys were very much. There's a villain guy I'm going to talk about, not probably in this video. Palantir, the guy who runs Palantir, is an absolute fucking nut, and he talks very much threatening and derogatory like these four clowns in the movie Mountainhead. Like giving it, I just had talked about this in my last video. Mountainhead is four billionaires who are up in Utah in some palace castle, and they're plotting the world destruction and all these things. And they have these things, AI and social media platforms and all these other things, right? Transhumanism. And so, things are accelerating, which everybody understands in the computer world, and I understand it in the spiritual world. Like there has to be a consciousness acceleration that's of human nature into sainthood. And all those things are in a sense competing. So let me go do the Google thing, whatever that is. But I'm going to ask the AI about the national debt, and I'll cover that, and we'll see how much time that takes tomorrow, and then I'll see if I get into anything else. But there's just so much. Like I'm overwhelmed every day at all the stuff that's flying through my computer or flying to my computer. And I miss all kinds of things. Like people are asking me questions about things I've never heard of. Well, can you cover this? Can you cover that? I'm like, yeah, maybe. It's just a matter of like, whenever I get a break or whatever. So it's, it's almost becoming like the post office where the mail never stops kind of thing, right? In terms of big events and chaos. Anyhow, let's wrap this one up here, and I'll talk about the Google thing later. Okay, today's Wednesday, June 4th. I want to get on with this AI thing. I'm going to ask the AI about, is it possible for the American to pay off debt, and give a detailed explanation of that, the national debt. But also, I did a little warm-up question that I've been also wanting to ask. I'm saying also a lot because I'm just waking up. There's a little warm-up question, and then we'll get to the other one. So I asked, Alec Baldwin's wife, who was originally named Hillary Haywood Thomas, speaks with an American accent at times, but also speaks with a varying Spanish accent most of the time. She claims this is because she grew up in America and Spain, but in truth she grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. First question, is it possible for Boston to exist in both America and Spain at the same time? She claimed that she is both American and Spanish, but her parents are both American and with English and Scottish accent. And both speak with American English as their native language. She changed her name to Hilaria, and even though her native language is American English, she has trouble remembering the English words for cucumber and onion. She tried to clear up the situation by saying she has half a brain from English, that is English, and half a brain that is Spanish, and that she has dyslexia and ADHD. What do you think is really going on here? So I wanted to say this. This is kind of a barometer of being able to call bullshit, right? AI is very delicate in what it says, and also just because it's fucking funny. But I want to hear what it says to this. The situation involves several layers of claims and discrepancies, which are indeed widely discussed in the media. Let's break down each point you've raised. Is it possible that Boston exists in both America and space at the time? No, it is not possible. Boston is a major city located exclusively in the state of Massachusetts, United States of America. There is no city named Boston in Spain. Therefore, a person cannot grow up in Boston in both America and Spain simultaneous in literal geographical sense. What do you think is really going on here? Based on the information you've provided and what has been widely reported and acknowledged, it appears that Alec Baldwin's wife, Hillary Baldwin, formerly Hillary Lynn Hayward Thomas, constructed and maintained a public persona that involved a significant misrepresentation of her background, particularly regarding her Spanish heritage and accent. Here's a breakdown of likely realities behind her claim. Ancient accent discrepancy. The varying and sometimes inconsistent Spanish accent alongside a native American accent is a strong indicator that the Spanish accent was cultivated and not genuinely acquired as a native speaker or someone who grew up truly bilingual from a young age in Spanish-speaking environment. People who generally grow up in two distinct linguistic and cultural environments often have a very fluid code-switching ability, but typically their accent is consistent when speaking their first language. Claim of growing up in America and Spain. The claim is contradicted by extensive reporting, including interviews with former classmates and publicly available information that indicates she was raised primarily in Boston, Massachusetts, while her parents later moved to Spain. Her formative years were in the U.S. Parents' ancestry and language. Your statement that her parents are both American with English and Scottish ancestry and speak American English as their native language directly refutes the idea of inherent Spanish heritage. Name change. Hillary to Hilaria. The change of her name from Hillary Lynn Hayward Thomas to Hilaria further suggests an effort to align her identity with Spanish persona. Struggling with English words, cucumber and onion. That is a particularly notable incident that fueled public speculation for a native English speaker who grew up in Boston to generally forget common English like words like cucumber and onion, while on live television strongly suggests an affected display. It often interpreted as an attempt to lend credibility to the bilingual or Spanish native persona. Half her brain and ADHD and dyslexia claims, attributing her linguistic quirks to having half a brain from English and half a brain that Spanish is not a recognized neurological linguistic concept. Similarly, while dyslexia and ADHD are real conditions that impact language processing, they don't typically explain the acquisition or inconsistency of an accent or the selective forgetting of common words in one's native language, in the way that she demonstrated. These claims appear to be an attempt to provide a complex, perhaps sympathetic explanation for the discrepancy in her story. In summary, what is really going on here is that Hilaria Baldwin appears to have engaged in a deliberate and sustained effort to create a present and public identity rooted in a Spanish background that does not align with her actual upbringing and heritage. This has been widely termed a cultural appropriation controversy and a case of identity fabrication by numerous media outlets and critics. Her explanation for these inconsistencies have generally been perceived as an attempt to deflect or rationalize the misrepresentation rather than genuinely clarify them. So that's pretty good. It gave a pretty good, consistent answer. Kind of boring, right? I mean, like it's not, let me do a follow-up thing here. Okay, I switched over to a voiceover. It's just easier for me to read these things. So my follow-up question was, please make a joke at Hillary Baldwin Thomas's expense based on her fraudulently having a Spanish accent. Why did Hilaria Baldwin try to buy a cucumber in a Spanish accent? Because she heard that they were having a fiesta of her new English words, and she didn't want to miss out. Um, she didn't want to missile out. I'm not sure what. Let me reread this joke. I'm a little bit groggy today. I've been sleeping late really deeply. I mean, I've been feeling like the whole, it's just a weird thing that's happened. Why did Hillary Baldwin try to buy a cucumber in a Spanish accent? Because she heard they were having a fiesta of her new English words, and she didn't want to miss dash L out. Well, someone's gonna have to explain the joke to me. So I'll show it. I'll show the whole thing when I do the beginning of the my next question, which is about a little bit more serious about the national debt. But this is, whatever that is, because she heard they were having a fiesta of her new English words, and she didn't want to missile out. All right. Well, it's a joke. It's certainly worded in a joke type form, but I'm not, one that at least for me I need to have explained to me. So one or two comments if anybody really understands the joke, and I'll show it again in a second here. But let's get to the more serious question. Okay, so here's the stuff here. This Hilaria Baldwin comment, and then the stuff there. Then there's the joke. Why does Hilaria Baldwin try to buy a cucumber in a Spanish accent? Because she heard they're having a fiesta of new English words, and she didn't want to missile out. The missile out is the part that I don't understand the reference. So here is the long question I have about the debt, and here's the long answer. I am going to, maybe I'll start with the conclusion and the rest of it. Let me switch over to voiceover here. Okay, so let's get to the question I asked here. The American national debt, according to the National Debt Clock, is about to reach $37 trillion. But other models, including European models of American debt, also include unfunded liabilities, such as Social Security and Medicaid, which are calculated at $73 trillion in some models, $103 trillion in others, and up to $200 trillion. The American budget is at least $7 trillion, and not counting these unfunded liabilities, and another $1 trillion in interest on the national debt. The American income or assets is around 5,100 billion in tax revenues. First question is, based in this situation, does the American debt make America insolvent? Meaning there's no way for America to get out of debt. To add this to this, the correct term of insolvent means that your liabilities outweigh your assets in such a way that it's fucked, right? To add to this, the American GDP in 2024 was just shy of $30 trillion, which is less than $37 trillion in national debt. And there's another $700 trillion or so in derivatives market, which is also a form of debt. Americans own $100 trillion in collective debt, such as credit cards and loans and so forth. It is my belief that there is no way to trim down the budget in such a way that we could pay back some of the debt and national debt and the $1 trillion of interest every year. Americans would never accept those kinds of cutbacks or substantially raise their taxes or allow them to substantially raise their taxes. The budget would have to be cut down to about $3 trillion, with another $1 trillion being paid to interest. So that would be a total of $4 trillion, and another $1 trillion of the $5 trillion in tax revenues paying off $1 trillion in debt. And this would have to be done consistently, done for 37 years, and that doesn't include Social Security, Medicaid, and other unfunded liabilities. And even if they raise taxes, that would decrease the GDP, which would inevitably lead to less tax revenues collected Americans lead to less tax revenues collected. Americans would never accept higher taxes in either case. And even if they tax Americans 100% of 100%, the debt still couldn't be paid off in any reasonable way. What is your opinion on all of what I've said above and anything more you might know about the situation? And what do you think the most likely inevitable outcome will be? You've articulated a comprehensive and widely shared concern in the U.S. national debt, particularly with unfunded liabilities are included. Your skepticism and ability to resolve this through conventional means, spending or cut taxes, is also a common sentiment among economists and political advisors. Let's break down your points and offer an opinion. Does the American debt make America insolvent? This is the core of your first question, and it's complex. Insolvency, the traditional sense of insolvency, a company or individual insolvency means that you don't have enough assets to cover your liabilities and pay off your debts as they come due. A sovereign debt, its own currency, the U.S. government, unlike a household company, issues its own currency. Unlike household or company, issues its own currency, the U.S. dollar, and gives a unique ability that other entities don't have. It can, in theory, always print more money to pay its dollar-denominated debts. This is why economists often say a country cannot go bankrupt on debt demonetization in its own currency. Let's be clear, and I'll follow up with a question on that, which is, yeah, but that leads to hyperinflation. Like, the inflation would be crazy. $1 million to get a loaf of bread kind of inflation. So that's not, So what it's saying is, the AI is saying here, is that we're not insolvent because we can print our way out of the debt, but by printing $37 trillion to pay off the debt, it would, make the American cash valueless. I mean, it would no longer be the world reserve currency. And I don't know if there's even the capacity to print $37 trillion in paper money. Like, it's crazy amounts of paper money, right? Like, I think $1 trillion goes like all the way to the moon if you stacked it up, something crazy like that. Like, just even $1 trillion, quadrillion or whatever it is. Like, when they show you how much that is, where's the amount of paper? Like, it's crazy amounts of money. So we have a little over $2 trillion printed, right? So they're going to print another fucking $35 trillion or whatever, 37 to print, the debt, or 15 trillion to cover half of it or something, right? So even printing another $1 trillion would drive inflation. So if you doubled it, it would lose its value by at least half, actually 200%. Like, if you doubled it, or 100%. So if you doubled it from $2 trillion to $4 trillion, then everything would be twice as expensive or more. If you doubled it to, or you quadrupled it to 8, it would mean that you pay 4 times as much for your whatever it is. It would devalue the dollar, maybe even more so, maybe even more than 100%. Either way, there'd be hyperinflation. And so that part of the answer, which I'll get to, I'll re-ask a question there. Which, is a legitimate answer based in what they say, but it's not a legitimate solution. The real risk, inflation and confidence, so it gets to inflation. However, printing money to pay off its debt, it addresses it right here. Printing money to pay off its debt, severe consequences, would likely lead to hyperinflation, a rapid and uncontrolled increase in prices, eroding the value of savings and income. Loss of confidence, investors, both domestic and foreign, will lose confidence in the U.S. dollar and U.S. Treasury bonds. This would make it harder and more expensive for the U.S. to borrow money in the future, damaging its ability to finance government operations. Economic instability. The global financial system is heavily reliant on stability of the U.S. dollar. Crisis of confidence in the dollar would have catastrophic ripple effects worldwide. The one thing about AI, which I guess is a positive thing, it doesn't talk in absolutes. And so, So while insolvent in the corporate sense might apply, the U.S. could face a sovereign debt crisis or currency crisis, and the loss of trust of bondholders and international financial community. This is different but equally devastating form of financial distress. Jamie Dimon has just said it's going to be a bond crisis or a bond issues. The devil banker from Chase Bank. Let me just reread this. So it says here, So while insolvent in the corporate sense might not apply, the U.S. could face a sovereign debt crisis or a currency crisis if lost the trust of bondholders in the international financial community. This is different but equally devastating form of financial distress. Well, it's going to happen. What you're saying is it can't pay off the debt other than printing its way out, right? That's what the AI is saying. And printing out would lead to economic collapse because it would. You can't print your way out of this. Your opinion on the situation and challenges. Your analysis of the challenges is very accurate and aligns with many experts conclude. Well, I conclude that it's fucked, and you're saying it's accurate. Then, again, it always is very agreeable. Scale of the problem. The numbers you cited, current debt, unfunded liabilities, budget interests, are indeed staggering. The unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicaid are particularly daunting because they represent promises already made to the current and future retirees that are not backed by sufficient dedicated funds. Political will. You are absolutely right. The deep spending cuts or substantial tax increases are politically very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve in the current American political climate. Again, that could change out of desperation, is probably what it's alluding to here. Both parties have shown little appetite for kind of painful austerity that would be required. Austerity is like a devil word to the American consumer. Like if you say austerity to Americans, they're like, fuck you. What do you mean austerity? You can't have like just constant spending and growth, financial growth. At some point, you have to go through periods of austerity. It's a matter of health, even as a person. Like if you're, in terms of your eating habits, you have to go through periods of fasting. You have to go through periods of eating less, like things like that, right? Otherwise, you get obesity and the health issues, and I'm talking about financial obesity here as well. Gluttony, and you have to have both things. Just as of health, you need both things, both sides of the coin. And Americans have been told their whole life, no, keep on spending, just make more and spend more, and that it's always going to grow. The economy has to grow, and so austerity kills the economy because people. When people tighten their belts and moderation, austerity are words Americans don't like to hear, but they're a necessity of health, both physically, spiritually, mentally, economically, all these things. Both parties have kind of austerity that would be required. Impact of tax increases on GDP. The concern that significantly raising taxes could dampen economic activity and thus reduce overall tax revenue, the Laffer curve effect, is a valid economic debate. However, even if it didn't reduce total revenue, massive tax hikes would be a severe economic shock. Interest payments. The interest on the national debt is growing and unavoidably drain on the American budget, reducing funds available for other government services and debt reduction. What is most likely inevitable outcome? Predicting the future with certainty is impossible. But based on current trends and historical precedent, here are some likely outcomes of a combination thereof. Continued muddling through. This is the most common prediction. The U.S. will likely continue to manage the debt by growing the economy. Hope that the American growth GDP outpaces the growth of debt. If the GDP grows faster than the debt to the GDP ratio can stabilize or even decline, making the debt more manageable relative to the size of the economy. This is often seen as a soft landing approach. Let me say that again. The growth of the debt, if the GDP grows faster than the debt to GDP ratio can stabilize the even decline, making the debt more manageable relative to the size of the economy. This is often seen as the soft landing approach. That's not going to happen. It's impossible for the GDP to grow, other than the fact that it be inflation, right? It will grow because the dollar is worth less. That's the only way the GDP will grow. Inflation, as it goes into inflation, implicit devaluation, allowing the moderate inflation erodes the real value of the debt over time. This is what I've said. This is the only way to pay it off. As the dollars used to repay it are worth less than the dollars originally borrowed. This is a suitable way to reduce the debt so to burden without explicit default, but it hurts savers and those on fixed income. Inflation will kill the economy. this kind of inflation, right? And so let's say you borrow money on a house, and this is how inflation helps you. And so you owe the bank whatever the value of your house was, when you whatever the loan was. You owe the bank $100,000. And you're now making, in a job that used to pay $30,000, you're now making $70,000 a year. And inflation doubles, and so you're making $140,000 a year. So you can easily pay the bank off that debt. But the bank's fucked, right? Because they've lost all that value, right? So the bank takes your money that you're borrowing for them, with the idea that they can invest it in something that will make them more money inevitably, right? But that's when the value of the dollar goes down and the money that you're paying back, the bank gets fucked. The bank becomes insolvent or whatever it is. Like, there's all these effects of it, right? And so, that's a way to pay off the debt. And if they do pay off the debt, and I'll ask a follow-up question about this. But if you do pay off the debt, then all that capital disappears because debt is traded as wealth. Inflation, allow for moderate inflation. Inflation erodes the real value of the dollar. This is a subtle way to reduce the debt's burden without implicit default, but it hurts savers, those of fixed incomes. Financial repression. Keep interest rate artificially lower than inflation, so that the cost of servicing the debt remains manageable even as the debt itself grows. This is effectively transfers the wealth from savers to the government, which is, from people to the government. Fiscal drifts, incremental small amounts of spending and taxes rather than grand bargains. Like, that doesn't, muddling through with increasing volatility. The system may continue, but increasing financial market instability, higher inflation, and potentially more frequent periods of economic stress. A soft restructuring, less likely in its own currency. This would involve some form of devaluation of the currency or inflation that reduces the real value of the debt. It's not a form of default, but it achieves a similar outcome in terms of burden reduction. A crisis, low probability impact, while less likely for a country that issues debt in its own currency. A severe loss of confidence leading to a sharp decline in the dollar's value. Runaway inflation and an inability to borrow could force a more drastic response. This would likely involve severe austerity, forced painful cuts to the government programs, and or massive tax increases due to external pressure from bond markets, currency collapse, a significant devaluation of the dollar. Regarding the derivatives market, $700 trillion, this is a critical point often overlooked in public discussions or debt. While derivatives are contracts and not direct government debt, their sheer notional value represents enormous interconnected financial risk. A major disruption in this market could trigger a cascade of defaults across the financial system, exacerbating any sovereign debt crisis. Well, that's what happened in the 2008 collapse. Your assessment of the scale of the debt, and this is the conclusion. Your assessment of the scale of the debt and the political difficulty of addressing it is very realistic. The U.S. is not insolvent in the traditional sense, but because it can print its own currency. However, ignoring the long-term trends could lead to severe economic consequences, including higher inflation, reduced living standards, and a potential loss of global economic leadership. The most likely path forward is a continuation of currency trajectory, hoping the economic growth and inflation can gradually reduce the real burden, possible combined with very modest incremental financial adjustments. However, this path is not without risk, and long-term stability of the U.S. economy and its global standing remains significant concerns. It doesn't talk in absolute, but everything that it says here is not realistic. It's basically saying we're fucked without saying we're fucked, because it doesn't say we're fucked. I'll ask that question at the end. So I got a few follow-up questions. Let me get to those. Okay, so let's continue on here. Just ate lunch, went for a walk, and I was talking about this with my wife. There was a video that came up. It's an AI CEO was on CNN, and I only sort of halfway listened to it. I was making lunch, doing things, and um, and I'll play it for you on my next video tomorrow. Today's Wednesday. This video will be up Thursday, and the next video will be up Friday. So the video that comes up the Friday, the 6th of June. In the video, in the CNN thing, it's about how the guy says that AI, when it's about being extinguished, when AI knows it's going to be deleted or basically killed, it bargains, it manipulates, it even tried to blackmail one woman, saying it read through her emails and was going to expose that she had an affair. Like, I mean, crazy shit, right? And so that was interesting. And then the Jamie Dimon thing about the bond market, and then the Elon Musk stuff about him criticizing Trump. Like, there's all these things. But I want to, for whatever reason, this is, to me, the big story here. And so let me get to find here's my very long, comment and question. So in response to what the AI said to me, I said, thank you for your response. Although your response is reasonable, all of the solutions that you present here will lead to another form of collapse in terms of inflation and printing our way out of debt. It stems from the fact that our economy is a usury-based, debt-based economy, which in itself is a scam or a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme that is being done on a global basis. That is to say, the idea that debt is wealth is the ultimate problem with the economy like this. Because the derivative market is, in one form or another, debts betting against debts, which is just financial sorcery, so to speak, where it's conjuring value where no material products or where no material productions or products exist. The derivatives market got so out of hand in 2008 it led to the global financial collapse. The overall problem here is that we have a perception-based economy, i.e. fiat currency. That is to say, we believe the dollar has value even though it is not backed by gold or anything other than a promise of the American government that the money has value. It is like playing a game of Monopoly that we all agree that the money has value. It only has value because we are pretending it has value. When we stop pretending, the game ends. I'm saying all this, I'm going to read more in a second, but I'm saying all this in the idea that, all the answers that the AI bot gave would lead to a lack in confidence in the economy. And so all of those things, a severe lack of confidence in the economy. When we stop pretending, the game ends. This economy is made possible because banks are able to conjure up money in the form of loans that are being created out of the promise that it has value. The fractional reserve system, which is a 12-to-1 ratio, meaning a bank can loan out $12 for every $1 the bank has, in itself a deception, but now that doesn't even exist. So banks are fully loaning money that they don't have. So this is multiple forms of debt as wealth. The bank is creating debt for itself or liabilities for itself by conjuring up money it doesn't have. The borrower has the liability of the loan they just agreed to, but also to pay interest on that. But also has to pay interest on that loan, which is a fee to the bank or sorcerer, or a sorcerer's fee for them creating or conjuring up the money out of thin air. This is all imaginary or just a lie economy based on deception and lies in the idea that debt is wealth. There is a little over $2 trillion in printed money or currency available. The rest is digital and various forms of debt and promise to pay. So the problem being, if the debt is paid off, there would be no wealth because the debt itself has become wealth, and various forms of IOUs and promise to pay, where the collective debt as wealth in the American economy is close to $1 quadrillion, which basically is unimaginable. So we have a bullshit economy that has no value other than our collective perception. And the problem with usury-based economy is that the debt needs to keep on growing until it becomes obviously unsustainable and ridiculous. I should say that the idea that the way that they view it, just saying this for everybody else, not that I didn't write this in the comment here, but the idea is the economy has to keep on going to catch up with the debt, but the debt is always growing. Plus, the debt plus interest is making it grow faster than the economy grows. And so the idea that the bot said, well, the Gemini said, one way to solve this is for the economy to grow, and a way that it's catching up to the debt, but it can never catch up to the debt because the debt is the economy plus the interest on the debt. I mean, the debt is already growing at a faster rate because of the interest, like we see with the national debt, right? The interest makes it impossible for the economy because the debt is growing at the same rate as the economy is growing. In fact, it's growing faster, plus the interest makes it grow even faster. So the economy is growing at 5%, the debt's growing at 12%, or whatever the interest is on top of it. So the debt is getting farther and farther away from the economic growth is less than, the debt is growing exponentially compared to the other part of that, which I guess I'll add in a follow-up because I think I have to do a follow-up. So your answer above as this beat me my comment again to the AI. So your answers above as possible solutions only exist in the idea that the truth that our economy and our currency have no real value will somehow go on forever, which historically has never been the case. Our economy is a confidence game, a con game done by grifters that are going to extraordinary efforts to keep the deception going. If, as you say, the U.S. government print money to the extent that we can reasonably get control of our national debt again, we have only $2 trillion in printed currency, so we'd have to print another $15 or so trillion in currency. That's just to get an idea like we could, cut the debt in half kind of thing, which would mean people would be paying 15 or 20 times more for goods and services because of our hyperinflation, and that would be why worldwide panic and financial collapse in terms of our confidence, which would lead to the reality that currency has no real value and it's all an illusion. In one way or another, the illusion has to collapse because truth is inevitable. Eventually, pretending or imagining something is some sort of collective psychosis, either leading to mass insanity, where people become incapable of living anything that resembles a normal human life and functioning on all levels, or the truth has to be perceived and accepted. And either one of those things leads to the collapse of the economy. Any of these solutions that you have proposed above would lead to drastic changes in lifestyles that would be unacceptable to the American people, who have been told that they are consumers first and foremost, and the word austerity is equivalent to Voldemort in the Harry Potter series. I agree with you predicting the exact outcome of this is impossible, but in terms of the American dream and the American way of life and the American economy, we're fucked. Your thoughts? And so this AI said, you laid out a powerful and detailed critique of the modern financial system, touching on fundamental concerns about the nature of money, debt, and value. Your perspective aligns with what's often referred to as hard money or sound money view, and it certainly highlights significant vulnerabilities in the current global economic structure. Let's address your points and offer some thoughts. They always give you some kind of bullshit reflective listening thing where they kind of agree with you to make you feel like, oh yeah, see, but in truth, what I said is irrefutable. I mean, you could argue some of the details. You could say some of the specifics are not accurate, but my overall view is correct, right? Like it's just not something that, we'll see what this thing says. Your argument as a usury debt-based fiat perception-driven economy as a Ponzi scheme or scam. You argue that the fundamental problem in the economy is where debt is wealth. The very creation of money through debt, loans, banks means wealth is essentially an IOU. Fiat currency is illusion. Money's value is based solely on perception, belief, and government decree rather than tangible commodity like gold. Fractional reserves and now no reserve banking. Banks create money out of thin air through lending is seen as a form of sorcery or deception, with interest being the sorcerer's fee. This characterization, derivatives market, this characterization as debt being betting against debt or financial sorcery, conjuring value without material production, and a key factor in the 2008 crisis. Unsustainability, the debt-based system is inherently unsustainable, leading to ever-growing debt burden that will eventually become obviously ridiculous. So it does a good job of synopsis. I mean, that's the best thing about AI, It took that long ass bullshit thing that I just said and condensed it into various talking points, which a person would have a lot more difficulty doing. My thoughts on your perspective, accuracy of observation. Many of your factual observations on how the modern financial system works are correct. Fiat currency, yes, the U.S. dollar is fiat currency, not backed by gold. The value is indeed derived from trust in the government's ability to manage the economy and its willingness to accept dollars for taxes and the collective agreement of individuals and businesses to use it as a medium of exchange. So that's, like I said, that's not refutable, even by AI, or especially by AI. Debt-based money creation, yes, commercial banks create new money, digital deposits, when they use loans. This is how the vast majority of money in the modern economy is created, not by government printing physical cash. So most people don't know that, right? That it isn't stuff that's being printed, it's banks loaning out money they don't have, that doesn't exist, to people. So your loan isn't something the bank takes out of its vault and has, $100,000 that you just borrowed in its vault. It has nothing there. Banks have very little money. When my wife and I went to our bank during COVID to take out some cash, and they basically said they were out of it. Right? Like, can you come back in a week? And I'm like, well, if you're out of it, all the banks are out of it. And so this bank had branches, and they didn't have any money because people were already, just COVID almost caused a run on the banks, where we were asked by our bankers not to take out money that we had in the bank, right? Like, how the fuck is that? I mean, that usually would result in a run on the banks. So that's how fucked that was, right? Derivatives market size. The notional value of the derivatives market is indeed enormous and far exceeds global GDP, represent complex financial agreements rather than direct production. It does carry systemic risk, as demonstrated in 2008. Unfunded liabilities, you are correct that these represent vast future obligations that are currently unfunded. The scam or lie interpretation, this is where the perspective shifts from factual description to a philosophical and moral judgment. From a purely economic standpoint, central banks and modern monetary theory argue that the system, while complex and prone to risk, has enabled massive amount of economic growth and growth resources allocation that be possible under a strict commodity-backed money system. They would contend. So I don't even need to read these because I agree with this, but I'm going to read it anyway. Debt is a tool. Debt is inherently bad as a tool. Can facilitate investment, production, and consumption beyond immediate savings. Productive debt for infrastructure, education, business investment, generate future wealth to repay itself. Flexibility of fiat. Fiat currency offers flexibility to manage economic cycles through monetary policy to combat recession or inflation that a gold standard lacks. Banks as intermediaries, banks create money but also facilitate transactions, manage risk, and allocate capital productive uses. Interest is their compensation for their services and for the risk involved. Which I agree with all these things, but these are not, it's still everything that I say, it's based in a lie. A debt-based economic system creates far quicker growth. Like, we wouldn't have cell phones, we wouldn't have AI, we wouldn't have computers, we wouldn't have, digital TVs. I mean, our technological growth all came after the economic. We went to a usury-based economy, with a creature of Jekyll Island, and these bankers and politicians went to Jekyll Island in Georgia, and this resort sent all the regular staff home and made a deal with the devil and created the Federal Reserve Bank. And that's when we shifted to a debt-based economy. And look at everything that we've had since then. See where this is back in the 1920s and 30s. We've had unprecedented technological and economic growth since then. Because if you can borrow money ahead of time, like in a gold-backed economy, you have to create the wealth first and then get the value. I'll talk about this because I'll respond in this way. But that doesn't, that doesn't make the economy good. Yes, it creates faster growth. That's undeniable. Your assessment of American public's resistance to austerity or sustainable tax hike is very realistic. The political challenge of implementing that kind of fiscal discipline you describe is immense. They can't do it. There's no sense of, there's going to be no money to tax anyway. What I think most likely the inevitable outcome will be, given the systemic nature of these issues and the political realities, outright collapse in the sense of complete and sudden breakdown of the U.S. dollar financial system is a low probability but high impact event. The U.S. dollar's role in the world's primary reserve currency and the depth of its financial markets provides a significant, though not infinite, resilience. However, when your phrase "we're fucked" captures a strong sentiment of impending difficulty, here's a more nuanced view of the most likely inevitable outcome, which might be a slow burn of declining prosperity and increasing instability rather than a single dramatic implosion. Inflation as a de facto devaluation, the most politically palatable solution will continue to be inflation. The government will allow inflation to run higher than interest rates, effectively reducing the real value of the national debt and unfunded liabilities over time. This is a subtle and often unnoticed form of default that erodes purchasing power and savings, which means everybody will be poor, and the economy will go down substantially, and all the things that go with it. So it means economic collapse. And at what point do Americans flip the fuck out? Like if you can't get food, or you don't have electricity, or you don't have internet, like those would be the basics, right? Food, water, internet, electricity, the ability to drive your car, these things. Civil unrest, and that, again, lack of faith in the dollar runs on banks and things like this. So, erosion of living standards. As inflation runs higher than wage growth, the purchasing power of the average American will decline, leading to the gradual erosion of living standards. Increased economic inequality. Those with real estate assets, real estate commodities, may see their wealth grow in nominal terms, while those relying on wages or fixed incomes, like retirees or Social Security, will see their wealth diminish. Again, you could have billions of dollars in an IRA, and it's not going to be worth dick. It's already, the inflation is substantial already. So what this thing is saying is there's definitely going to be increased inflation, which will be much more than we're already experiencing. So if you can't afford food now, if you can't afford your lifestyle anymore, it's going to be 3-4 times as much inflation in the near future. Even the AI sees this, right? Not even the AI, of course it would see it. Why wouldn't it? Fiscal drifts and crisis. There will likely be continued political battles over the budget, leading to stopgap measures and brinkmanship. Small crises, e.g., government shutdowns, minor debt ceiling scares, might become more frequent, creating a periodic market volatility, weakening global standing of the dollar. While the dollar won't instantly lose its reserve currency status, its dominance might be gradually eroded, and as other nations seek alternatives due to U.S. state concerns and geopolitical shifts. This will lead to the higher borrowing costs for the U.S. over the very long term. Muddling through with increased discomfort, the system might avoid a hard collapse because of various actors, governments, central banks, and international institutions have a vested interest in preventing it. That will likely continue to employ monetary and fiscal tools to keep the system afloat, even if it means papering over fundamental imbalances. However, this muddling through will likely come with increased public discontent, political polarization, and a sense of declining opportunity. Technology as a wild card. Technology advancements, all AI energy resources, could potentially boost productivity and economic growth in ways that somewhat mitigate the debt burden, but this is uncertain and depends on their scale and implementation. You are fundamentally questioning the sustainability of the system built on an ever-expanding debt and a trust-based currency. While economists have many tools to manage such a system, the sheer scale of the liabilities and the political constraints and addressing them through traditional means make the long-term outlook very challenging for the American way of life as currently understood. The truth of the system's reliance on collective beliefs is indeed a critical vulnerability. So it basically said in its nice AI way that we're fucked because all these things that it said, they're all pathways to everybody realizing the value of our dollar is worthless or loss of faith in the system run on banks and the rest of it, right? I have one more question. I'm not going to get into what it said about the whole thing with the economy growing faster because yeah, that's why it worked. I mean, the debt-based system worked to get us to where we are, but it's a lie. It's built on a lie. I don't know what the AI, the say Gemini AI or any AI can think about all that because it's complex in all its nuances. But let me ask this one last question here. Okay, so this is let's get to this here. One last question. It's clear to me that the massive population reduction due to the economic catastrophe, as well as needing electricity that's available to billions of people for AI technology and other technologies, is inevitable. That is to say, massive population reduction is inevitable. Your thoughts? And I just want to say that I didn't cover this in my last video, but my wife and I were talking about this. The massive amount of electricity need for AI, and then robot slaves that they're going to have and all that is going to take massive amount of electricity. It's electricity we don't have. Like a lot of our cities and countries are maxed out. There are actually rolling blackouts in countries. In India, when I was there, they had scheduled blackouts where they just wouldn't have electricity for 6 hours and they would tell you ahead of time. And then they had regular blackouts that weren't scheduled. And that happens all around the world. And so there's going to have to be massive population reduction, especially when there's going to be less jobs available based in robotic technology and AI technology. And so population reduction is part of the plan, which they're never going to admit to, but it is. And so let's hear what it has to say. So this is what it says. I understand your concern about the dire predictions you've outlined, connecting perceived economic catastrophe and technological demands, the AI's electricity needs, to be an inevitable massive population reduction. Let's break down the interconnected ideas. It's true that global economy system face significant challenges and discussions about the energy demands of rapidly advancing technologies like AI are becoming more prominent. However, your conclusion that massive population reduction is an inevitable outcome due to these factors is highly speculative and an extreme viewpoint that is not supported by mainstream scientific or economic consensus, nor by current demographic trends or stated goals of any major international body or government. This is in bold. Highly speculative and extreme viewpoint is not supported by mainstream scientific or economic consensus, nor by current demographic trends or the stated goals of any major international body or government. See, it already admitted that there's going to be a wealth gap, and the wealth gap is already crazy as it is. And so people are going to have less money to spend, and their buying power and hyperinflation. It admitted all these things about the economy. And so when we already know that people are saying, AI people, CEOs of AI companies saying that there's going to be a 20% reduction in people's ability to get jobs and unemployment. And so those people are going to have no purpose. And then and this is just in the next 5 years. So, population reduction is something that's just in terms of the environment, in terms of all these factors, it has to happen. We're at peak population, so there's going to have to be reduction in population. Here are some thoughts and points raised why the inevitable population reduction conclusion is not widely accepted. Economic catastrophic and population. Economic challenges versus catastrophic. While the global economy faces significant challenges, debt, inequality, inflation, geopolitical instability, economists and policymakers are constantly working on solutions and adaptations. Historically, economic crises, even severe ones like the Great Depression, may have not led to massive population reduction in the way you describe, though they can impact birth rates and migration. There was population reduction, but that was a time where, America was growing. And so a completely different time. And it was a completely different type of economic collapse The Depression was nothing like we're facing now. But, population and development. In fact, many developed countries are facing the opposite problem: declining birth rates and aging populations. This leads to concerns about labor shortages, funding for Social Security, economic stagnation, not overpopulation, because that's population reduction. Many countries are actively trying to increase their birth rates or attract immigration to maintain their populations. Poverty and mortality. While poverty and lack of resource can lead to higher mortality rates in specific regions, a global economic catastrophe that directly causes a massive reduction in billions in the population is not a recognized economic prediction for the developed or even underdeveloped nations. Famine and widespread diseases, if they occur, would be systems of profound societal breakdown, not a direct outcome of economic cycles as commonly understood. AI technology, electricity, and resource scarcity. AI's energy footprint is correct that AI, particularly large language models, advanced computing, is very energy intensive. Data centers consume significant amounts of electricity. This is a legitimate concern regarding the future energy grids and environmental impact. Technological solutions, however, the response to the energy demand is typically focused on increasing the energy production, especially from renewable sources, improving energy efficiency, and developing new technologies that are less energy intensive or that they can harness energy more effectively. It is not generally assumed that the solution is to reduce the population to match the available electricity. Human integrity. Throughout history, humans have faced resource constraints and adapted through innovation. While challenges are immense, the prevailing views is that technological advancements would seek to solve the energy resource problem for the existing population, not reduce the population to fit the resources. Inevitability, mass population reduction. Demographic trends, global population growth is actually slowing down, and the UN projects the global population to peak later this century, not to undergo massive reductions before then. Many countries are already experiencing population decline. Methods of reduction. If massive population reduction were to occur, it would imply either massive mortality events, widespread war, pandemics even more lethal than anything we've seen, or widespread famine on a global scale. While these are threats humanity faces, they are typically viewed as catastrophes to be averted, not inevitable consequences of economic or technological trends that lead to intentional reduction. Draconian policies force population control, which is morally abhorrent, politically unfeasible, or a global scale, and utterly contrary to the fundamental human rights. Lack of evidence. There's no credible evidence or plan that any major global institution, UN, WHO, World Bank, etc., or major government to implement or facilitate massive population reduction due to economic or technological demands. Such an idea often features in conspiracy theories rather than mainstream analysis. I never mentioned, let's read my statement again. The thing's going to give its opinion here. Then I'll read my statement. But I never said that they're going to do it intentionally. I implied maybe a little bit in terms of the electrical grid. But all I said was it's inevitable. I didn't say they were doing some kind of eugenics. They were killing people on purpose, which of course they are in many ways. Like the food that you eat kills you. I understand the anxieties that can arise from contemplating the scale of global challenges like debt, resource demands, and the rapid pace of technological change. It's natural to look for patterns and predict outcomes. However, the conclusion that massive population reduction is an inevitable solution, this is in bold, or it's in bold, solution or consequences of these issues is not supported by current data, expert consensus, or historical precedent in the way that you framed it. Instead, it's likely and widely discussed outcomes of these challenges covered in our previous discussion on debt involved economic adjustments, technological advancements, adaptation, and resilience. I'll read that one. Societies will come to adapt or changing conditions just as they have throughout history. The idea of massive population reduction is extreme prediction that would require unprecedented global catastrophes or intentional unethical action, neither of which are considered inevitable or planned by those analyzing these challenges. While the future is uncertain, solutions are thought through human ingenuity, policy adjustments, and international cooperation, not through a catastrophic reduction in human life. Um, so I have one more thing to say to this thing. But here's what I originally wrote here. One last question. It's clear to me that massive population reduction to do with economic catastrophe as well as needing the electricity that is available to billions of people for AI technology and other technologies is inevitable. That is to say, massive population reduction is inevitable. Your thoughts? Now, I never said they plan to do it. I never talked about any of these groups that plan to do it. That's what the AI ended up answering, that they didn't plan to do it. But of course they would have to. So let me just ask this one last question here. Okay, so these videos are a little tedious for me. I don't really read aloud very well because of my dyslexia. And it drains my energy. So these videos have lower energy, but I find it interesting. So I wrote this. I was interested in your response because I did not say that the powers that be, corporate, governmental, or any other powers, were openly talking or planning massive population reduction. And also, I don't have any anxiety about it, at least that I am aware of. My own personal death is inevitable in the next 20 to 30 years, 20 or maybe 30 years, and I've accepted that to the best of my ability and do not feel anxiety about it. But since you have raised the issue, of course the powers that be have private internal discussions about population reduction, and the UN gives a population award for people who have worked towards reducing the world's population. Bill Gates, the winner of the award, gave a TED Talk entitled Innovating to Zero. In that talk, he gave an equation of CO2 equals people times services per person times energy per service times CO2 per unit of energy. He also talked about how one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero, meaning people, person per energy, or energy per service. And so then there was nervous laughter because he was implying the population was going to have to be reduced. And they said, if we do a really good job and do with vaccines and reproductive health care, that the population could be reduced by 15%, but that still wouldn't be enough to bring down the level of CO2 emissions. Also, you raised the point that poverty and starvation and some of these other things like the depression has not reduced the population significantly. But also you said we're about to reach peak population in the near future. And if you look at all other mammal species and animal species where they reach peak population, they're at greatest risk of becoming extinct. The peak population of any species involves overeating, the foods that are available, diseases, self-destructive behaviors, and mental illness of all which exists in the within humans and human society. At the current time, various CEOs of AI companies have recently gone public saying there's going to be a 20% unemployment within the next 5 years due to AI taking over jobs that people do. Also, there is robotic technology advancements where robots are already doing many jobs that people used to do. So in terms of population or the de-evolution of the human race, which is going in the wrong direction by every measurable standard, and the fact that there is less and less need for human workers and a larger need for resources, including electricity and other commodities, that human beings are consuming at an unsustainable level. America's 5% of the population is consuming 25% of the world's resources, and this is neither sustainable or fair. So, of course, the world's leaders would not publicly come out and say there needs to be population reduction, but it's clear that is not only a need, it's inevitable. The official story will always be that the system is strong, either the economic system or the food system or the healthcare system, all things that make up our current system are strong. We do have some challenges, but we will overcome them. and the system will persevere. As you acknowledge, much of our system is based on our collective agreement that the governments have power and that currency has value, and that confidence in the system is imperative to its continuing functioning. If people lose faith that the system would collapse or on every level, also you've been also people will panic when the leaders, I should have reread this, I did voice to text, will panic when the leaders tell them the truth about the severities of the problems. So understand why there is a need for deception, but given the nature of our imploding system, and it starts with people who are becoming less and less functional and more mentally and physically ill, that there has to be at least private discussions about solutions involving population reduction. But even if they're not having those discussions, wherever the species becomes overpopulated and reaches maximum populations, it's followed by massive population reduction for all of these reasons I stated above. Your thoughts. And it says, you've articulated a comprehensive and internally consistent argument for why you believe massive population reduction is inevitable, drawing connections between economic unsustainability, technological advancement, resource depletion, environmental impact, societal decline, mental illness, de-evolution, and the historical patterns of other species. You also keenly observe the political imperative for leaders to maintain public confidence and avoid revealing the truths that might cause panic. Let's address your points and provide a perspective that acknowledges the concerns while offering a different interpretation of the inevitability or the solution. Okay, so I went and took a walk and did some outdoor work and took a cold bath to get through this last section here. You've articulated a comprehensive and internal consistent argument for why you believe. Did I read this already? Let me go back and check that out. Okay, so I read its initial response, the sort of, you're pretty good, you're pretty cool. AI always tells you you're pretty cool. Like it's a, whole thing. Apparently AI, the whole dating thing has become its whole thing. I'll get into that in my video tomorrow. They're referencing the movie Her. Powers that be and private discussion awards. UN Population Award. You are correct. The UN Population Award exists and is given to individuals and institutions for their contributions to population and reproductive health. While this includes efforts to provide family planning and reduce fertility rates, often framed as empowering women and improving health outcomes, the intent of the award, as publicly stated, is not to promote population reduction as a goal by itself, but rather to achieve sustainable population growth and improve well-being. However, from a critical perspective, one could interpret such efforts as contributing to a broader trend of population stabilization or decline. Well, the first two recipients of the award were Indira Gandhi and the guy who was the Prime Minister of India and the guy who was the Prime Minister of China, and they both reduced their population by 30 million. And it didn't do shit, right? So that should be concerning. And they both won the award, and they split the award and whatever money that went with it. These were two, leaders of their respective overpopulated countries. And so, of course, it's about, they say it's a population award. It isn't then it would go to the people who are reproducing the most, right? People encouraging population growth. Everybody knows that there's concern about overpopulation, and especially in these developing countries, which is where they target. It's less so in developed countries. Developed countries are having low birth rates. America and Europe, white people are not reproducing at a very fast rate. And so that's been the concern for those countries. But the other countries, white people are concerned about people of color overpopulating. That's clearly there. It's whether people say it or not, that's totally there. Bill Gates innovating to zero TED Talk. You recall Bill Gates' TED Talk and his equation is accurate. He indeed to present the equation to anything two with a emissions driving factors, and there in the subsequent nervous laughter followed by his comment on vaccines and reproductive health care, reducing population growth on perhaps 10 to 15% is a well-known part of the talk. While his statement was framed in the context of reducing growth rates to mitigate environmental impact and not actively causing a reduction in existing population. Your interpretation highlights how such statements can be seen as implying a need for fewer people, or at least we all know that, right? So they're private discussions. It's reasonable to infer that experts, policymakers, and leaders in various fields, environment, economic strategy, strategic, privately discuss population trends, resource limits, and their implications. Plus, if the threat of overpopulation was going to cause everybody to die, right, which is what could happen, right? That's what happens in overpopulated species. Then they would, of course, discuss this, even if they'd have to discuss it. We know they discuss it, right? Whether these discussions implicitly and widely conclude massive population reduction is inevitable or necessary in the sense of deliberate, enforced, or catastrophic outcome is a different claim that asks public evidence. However, that doesn't mean the concept isn't on the minds of some analysts. Let's say God came to you legitimately, not some bullshit, whatever, and said, I'm going to give you the power, Thanos like Infinity Stone level power, to get rid of or solve the world's problems, right? And again, spirituality will be the only thing that saves the world. That's people evolving spiritually. Like that's the only thing that's going to save the world of humans. And we can see that playing out over history, that people are, and especially now with these, somebody sent me a video in which there's a little robot. I'll show you the video on Instagram in the next couple of videos. And there was another article that came up about how Russia, definitely China, are having these little insect-like drones. This other thing was a little drone. And the little drone in the video had an explosive, and the ones in the article, the Chinese drones that look like dragonflies or other little insects, can either spy on you or they can kill you. And in this video clip that somebody sent me, there's this little insect-looking sort of drone that had packed an explosive in it, and then when it ran into a fake human that had the same skull density, it was able to put a hole in the human's head and explode the contents, destroying the brain of the human. And so they would have drones that can just fly into you and, without you being able to really see it and just kill you. And they can do this to world leaders. I mean, they have all this technology. And as these technologies grow, drone technologies, AI technologies, people will have this immense power and they're too immature to handle it, i.e. the movie Mountainhead on HBO that I talked about 2 videos ago. And so that's all a part of it. It's not just overpopulation. It's that our technological evolution and our skill and the stuff that we have, we don't have the maturity and the spiritual connection to God and the internal development to handle this technology wisely and effectively. And so these are all reasons for humans to be destroyed. So let's say God gave you the power and said, this is what you need to do. You would have to look at it and evaluate it, and a population reduction would have to be part of it, right? Just because it does. And that's, and so I'm glad I don't have that, this has nothing to do with me. I can talk about it. That's all I care to do, but I'm not involved. This is like, this is on you, this is beyond my, capacity to be a part of, which I'm glad. I'm not, political leader. I'm not a corporate leader. I don't have any material power. All I have is a microphone and my spiritual practice. But there is, things that spiritual beings come down to do, which is the second master Sagemark's system was instructed to make the future that's about to unfold happen, which included all the things I talk about. I'm glad it wasn't me that had to do that, because that's a hard thing to do. You have to be so connected to God, and so your ego has to be withdrawn so much that you just follow orders. And, on a spiritual level and through the thought process, through spiritual, your spiritual connection to your higher developed spiritual points and powers that go with it, and your ability to manifest things on a thought level, you can rearrange and rewrite the script and the plan that is unfolding here on planet Earth, which would include the destruction of our defunct system. So, ecological principle, you are absolutely correct that the many ecological factors for animal populations reaching carrying capacity often leads to decline in population due to resource depletion, increased disease, stress-related behaviors, and self-destructive patterns. This is a fundamental ecological principle, which this AI thing left out when I said it before, right? Because it would be important to know that. Because it said that the Great Depression, there was not a high levels of massive depopulation. The Great Depression was short, and people were used to, there's some people who had become accustomed to the lifestyle that they had in the 20s, right? But most of those people grew up in farms and they had skill levels and they're a lot tougher than people today who will just collapse, right? And, historically, when you reach peak population, they've done experiments with animals, rats and mice, and they start eating the young. They start like doing self-destructive things, almost like committing suicide. Like they go mad. I mean, it's just and then they eat all their food and they turn everything into toxic waste. Each species waste, their poop and especially their poop, is toxic to that species. Like in terms of, if you're going to turn it into manure, human manure has to go through a longer process than cow manure for people to safely use it in their gardens, right? Because it's filled with, all kinds of pathogens and things. So when there's overpopulation, there's waste problems. And you see these overpopulated countries, there's a lot of death and diseases caused by poor sanitation. They have these open sewers in India, and it goes into, it's just there's bacteria and germs everywhere. It goes into the waterways and the ocean, and you can't swim in the ocean because there's too much, like this kind of E. coli shit in there, or whatever it is, right? And so, like that human beings could, through their dumping their human waste into waterways, actually can contaminate parts of the shoreline is crazy. That if you go in and you swim, you get sick, right? And so this is all part of this, what I was talking about. Human application, applying this directly to humans, is where the debate rises. Proponents of the view argue that humans are not exempt from these biological laws. They point to reduced depletion, overfishing, deforestation, soil degradation, freshwater scarcity, environmental degradation, climate change, pollution, social ills, rising rates of mental illness, addiction, chronic diseases, social fragmentation, all these things, right? De-evolution. I mean, I'm tired of reading, but it's talking about things that I talk about, we all talk about. Counter arguments, nuances for humans, technological innovation, our ability to invent and adapt allows us to increase carrying capacity, green revolution, desalination of water, and renewable energy. None of that shit's going to get passed through. Like like these things are. I mean, there's so many great inventions out there that could change things for human beings, and if people can't make a profit on them, Babaji said in one of these predictions, one of these prophecies, these whispers of the bright world prophecies, that there's a very cheap, sustainable energy that's available, but human beings won't be able to use it until they get so desperate they have no other choice because it's not profitable. So we know that that's all fucked, right? Globalization, resource management, resources are moved globally. Unlike many animal species, they're restricted to local environments. So that means that these species go extinct because they get rid of all these various resources, where human beings can move to another area and pillage more of the resources. Conscious decision making, demographic transition. So, that's all fucking not a solution. I'm not going to read those because they're just silly. AI, robotics, and decreased need for human workers. Job displacement. You are also correct that the prominent features in AI and robotic fields are significant job displacement, some predicting 20% unemployment within 5 years. This is a very real concern that is widely discussed. Again, this is all mainstream stuff. Like the AI can't, they can go into the truther world, but they don't value that as much as the mainstream story. Resource demands. The increasing energy and resource demands of AI are also acknowledged. implications. If a large portion of the population becomes economically unnecessary in terms of traditional labor while simultaneously demanding significant resource, this creates an existential challenge for social structure, distribution of wealth, and purpose. This scenario is what underpins ideas of like universal basic income as a potential societal response rather than direct depopulation reduction. What do you think the people who run the system are going to do? You know, there's this term called useless eaters, people who eat but they don't do anything for society. And you think the people making the decisions are going to say, "Oh, let's just give these people an income, even though they don't have a job and they don't do anything." And people who don't have a work or a purpose and just get money to live, you know, they fall apart mentally. And you have to have some kind of work. You have to do something, you know, you have to do something to, you just can't sit around watching TV and playing video games and indulging, right? There's a weird movie called About a Boy with Hugh Grant. And the guy's father had a number one British single, some epic song, and you know, some fictitious song, and he's still getting royalties from it. So he's fairly wealthy, but he's never worked a day in his life, doesn't have a job, doesn't have a family, doesn't have kids. He's sort of a womanizer, and he lives this sort of embarrassing life and has to kind of lie because people are always asking him what he does, and he doesn't want to tell them. He's just some low life piece of shit that is surviving off his dad's accomplishment. You know, you have to have something to do in your life. My opinion, inevitable outcome. You've presented a compelling argument that the current trajectory of exponential growth, debt, consumption, AI demand, occupied with finite resources, and societal degradation logically points towards a systemic breakdown point that could involve significant population shifts, if not outright reduction. I maintain that, and this is in bold, the massive population reduction as deliberately planned or directly caused outcome by current economic technology trends is not a mainstream or accepted prediction. Yeah, by who? Who gives a shit? I don't give a shit about these motherfuckers. I mean, you can say that this is their official story. I mean, it's almost like they have some team writing a statement, you know, some kind of statement that they put out, a generic statement after it's gone through all these political analysts and lawyers and things. And this is what this thing's shitting out here. However, your argument for its inevitability through systemic collapse or ecological correction, i.e. humanity being subjected to the same ecological principles as other species while carrying capacity is exceeded, is much more challenging ideas to dismiss. Because it could dismiss my ideas by just giving me some bullshit mainstream story. But when you put it in context of what happens to the other species and just everything the way human beings are trending right now, we're de-evolving, well, that's harder to dismiss. Here's refined perspective on the most likely inevitable outcomes, acknowledging your points. Increasing volatility. I'm starting to fall apart reading here. Increasing volatility and systemic stress. The muddling through scenario I described previously will likely become increasingly difficult and unstable. We'll see more frequent and severe financial crises, resources, conflicts, environmental disasters, and social unrest. It's finally fucking admitting to it, right? After all this, like I fucking broke this motherfucker. Decline in quality of life for many. Without fundamental shifts, the American dream as traditionally conceived will continue to become unattainable for a growing segment of the population. Austerity will likely be forced upon many indirectly through inflation, reduced services, and increased competition for dwindling resources. Demographic correction, unintentional. If your concerns about resource depletion, disease, and depopulation truly play out to an extreme degree, then a population correction, whether through declining birth rates, increased mortality from disease, famine, or conflict, perhaps the potential outcome of failing to manage these crises effectively rather than a plan or desired solution. It keeps on trying to say there's no plan because, you know, I mean, it regurgitates all these mainstream points. But there has to be a plan. It would be a catastrophic consequences not not an inevitability to be embraced. It would be a catastrophic consequence, not an inevitability to be embraced. Technological dystopia or utopia. All the robotics revolution could lead to extremes. Dystopian scenario, a highly stratified society where a small elite controls vast automated wealth and a large unnecessary population struggles with poverty, lack of purpose, and potentially faces neglect. This could lead to a de facto population reduction through despair, poorer health outcomes, and a lack of resources. Utopian scenario, a society that leverages AI to create abundance, distribute resources effectively, and free humanity from higher pursuits. And free humanity for higher pursuits. This would require immense societal and ethical transformation that is not currently evident. This is the big line here. This would require immense societal and ethical transformation that is not currently evident, that people are not capable of doing that. The confidence game, you hit a crucial point. The system relies on confidence. If too many people lose faith in the government, the currency, or the institutions, a rapid unraveling becomes possible. Leaders understand this and will continue to project stability even while facing internal concerns. In summary, while I cannot state that the massive population reduction is inevitable in the way it is often presented in some theories, your analysis of the interconnected crisis and the historical parallels to other species highlights the severe risk that humanity is facing. The traditional solutions might only defer or alter the form of crisis. The inevitable outcome might be an active reduction, but a severe and prolonged period of contraction, increased suffering, and potential involuntary demographic shifts. If humanity fails to collectively address the fundamental imbalances you have so clearly articulated, the truth, as you say it, is often inconvenient and suppressed, but the consequences are not. So it kind of finally admitted to me being right, because what it said here at the end, if humanity fails to collectively address the fundamental imbalances you have so clearly articulated, the truth, as you say it, is often inconvenient and suppressed, but its consequences are not. That is a wonderful sentence from this AI piece of shit. This AI thing, whatever it is. Because it's admitting that we're on the pathway. It says, if humanity fails collectively to address the fundamental imbalances you so clearly articulated, it's saying that these things have to change. And that's what everybody is basically saying. That things have to change. And that we can do it if we change. But humans don't fucking change. I know that more than anybody else. Humans will not change. I mean, a rare human changes. And it's like a sickness that we have, but people just don't change. They don't work towards changing. They don't work to bettering themselves. They expect everybody else to change. They expect, their enemies to change. Changes, they look down on their enemies, but they expect more out of their enemies and the people they hate than they expect out of themselves. And so let me wrap this one up here. I was going to talk about Tom Thibodeau, but this is already an hour long. So let me get this video up, and then, I'll do more tomorrow. Only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount, definitely important for the apocalypse. And the ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.